Throughout the 1990s, Japanese studio Capcom had literally defined the survival horror genre. From its early Sweet Home to its landmark Resident Evil, Capcom quickly became the king of its own corner of gaming. It was only natural that the business executives would want a quick sequel, but the franchise's creative father, Shinji Mikami, struggled to find a way to keep a familiar formula fresh. After a year of work, he scrapped the game and started over from scratch. Fortunately, the result was another terrifying experience that went on to be one of the publisher's best-selling titles. After that, Capcom knew they had a giant franchise in the making and decided to start development on several different Resident Evil. One for the PlayStation 1, one for the Sega Dreamcast, and one for the upcoming PlayStation 2. Everything seemed to be going great. But somehow, smart business deals and innovative creative talent combined into a volatile mixture that changed all of those games into something else. Resident Evil 1 and 2 had both released for the PlayStation 1 initially, and were only later ported to other platforms. But with the release of the first 6th generation console, the Sega Dreamcast, Capcom decided to take advantage of the newer, more powerful hardware and move the main franchise to that system. In the meantime, Capcom wanted to keep its PlayStation fans happy and got to work on a spin-off title specifically for them. And of course, everyone knew the monster PlayStation 2 was coming, and Capcom got its core Resident Evil team working on that game, which would be part of the main series. However, well after these games were underway, Sony came to Capcom with a proposal. Sony knew that Resident Evil sold PlayStations. As such, they didn't want the main series to go off to rival Sega. Sony negotiated to keep the main series exclusive, at least for a limited time, to their console. Capcom could still make spin-offs for their competitors, but anything with a number in it would come to the PlayStation. Capcom executives agreed to the terms of the deal. There was only one small problem. Resident Evil 3 for the Dreamcast was almost done, as was the spin-off for the PlayStation, a direct violation of their new Sony deal. It was a classic case of the left hand not talking to the right. But being business executives, they came up with a solution that was both quick and cheap. If creatively wonky, just switch the titles. Thus, despite all the marketing that had been done to date, despite how the writing team had crafted them, despite the fact that it didn't necessarily make any sense, the PlayStation game became Resident Evil 3, and the Dreamcast game became the spin-off. Dodge that bullet! The newly reminted Resident Evil 3 Nemesis released in September 1999 for, of course, the PlayStation. The game starred Jill Valentine from the original Resident Evil in her attempt to escape Raccoon City. This was the first time in the series that there was only one playable character, which allowed the designers more time to work on each individual level. It took place both before and after the events of Resident Evil 2, showing its origins as a spin-off title meant to expand on an earlier title rather than standing as a brand new story. Nevertheless, its inclusion of the iconic Nemesis monster, a super creature that chased the player through the entire game, helped drive it to strong reviews and audience acceptance. If Capcom feared a backlash from its name swapping, it never materialized. Resident Evil 3 would go on to sell 3.5 million units, another smash hit for the franchise, and for Sony too. But the original Resident Evil 3 was on its way as well. Now named Resident Evil Code Veronica, the really a sequel but we're calling it a spin-off, released for the Sega Dreamcast in February 2000. This was the first Resident Evil not made by an internal Capcom team. Rather, this was the work of Nextech, a Sega-owned developer. Making full use of Sega's new next-gen hardware, Code Veronica would be the first game in the series to be truly 3D, not just pre-rendered to look pretty. Critics and fans alike agreed that Nextech took the fear factor to the next level, creating the scariest title to date in the father of all horror games. But there was a nagging complaint, and it was starting to become a problem. The actual gameplay was practically unchanged from the first Resident Evil. Fixed cameras, limited inventory, long loading screens, and worst of all, clunky controls all returned. Franchise fans still loved it, but at the same time, more and more people were drifting away. The series needed some kind of change, and soon. So all eyes turned to the one last game in development, the PlayStation 2 game, Resident Evil 4. The crew working on it was the core Resident Evil crew. Franchise creator Shinji Mikami was producing, and Resident Evil 2 director Hideki Kamiya was directing again. But the tension between Mikami's vision and Kamiya's style, which had been an issue on RE2, was worse this time around. Mikami had made a horror game, and horror is all about helplessness. But Kamiya was an action director who liked superpowered heroes who would lay waste to their foes in style. As Mikami looked on, Kamiya made a game that was practically unrecognizable from Resident Evil. Vibrant colors, stylish moves, and an unstoppable protagonist did not a horror game make. But there was one other thing. It was good. Mikami didn't want to stop Kamiya because he sensed that he was onto something massive. So he begged, he pleaded, and finally, he convinced the Capcom hierarchy to change the game to something else. Thus, Resident Evil 4 died to be reborn as Devil May Cry. As thoroughbred an action title as could possibly be imagined, DMC's hero Dante was about as helpless as Arnold Schwarzenegger in a tank, but with better moves. It was a stunning game that, when it released in fall 2001, brilliantly showcased the PlayStation 2's power, and at the same time, showed the world how to make an action game in 3 dimensions. Devil May Cry went on to become one of Capcom's best-selling and most iconic series. So Resident Evil wasn't just a hit franchise, it could accidentally make other hit franchises in the meantime. However, that still left Capcom without a new Resident Evil. And after the business and creative chaos that rocked the franchise, new deals and new directions would drive the series to its very peak. Tune in next time to see Resident Evil reinvent itself.